Welcome back to Close Up. Last week, the state Senate voted to repeal the death penalty in New Hampshire on a vote of 17-6. That follows a House vote of 279 to 88. And even with the looming threat of a veto from Governor Chris Sununu, those are veto-proof majorities. So unless there are dramatic changes, repeal appears to be as close to reality as it has ever been. Here to discuss this morning are former Congressman and former New Hampshire Supreme Court Justice Chuck Douglas and longtime anti-death penalty activist Barbara Keshen, who is also a prosecutor and a public defender. So decades of legal experience here. We appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about this. Barbara, you've been working on this issue for so long, and you've been this close before, and it hasn't gotten across the goal line. Do you think this is the year?
Yeah, I do think this is the year. I mean, barring any catastrophe, we have veto-proof majorities in the House and the Senate, and this should be the year that New Hampshire repeals the death penalty and becomes the 21st state in our nation not to have a death penalty.
Mr. Douglas, you wrote the statute, I believe, that of New Hampshire's death penalty. Yep. What's your perspective on this, particularly when we hear this debate? A lot of the case law that gets invoked is from Texas or Illinois or elsewhere.
Well, I know because I've heard Barbara and others testify about the other states. All I can say is that in New Hampshire, it is very rare that you get a capital murder case. And in the case of Michael Addison, you've got a guy that his lawyer admitted did it. So we don't have the argument, well, Addison may be wrongly convicted. His lawyer in the opening to the jury said, my client did shoot Officer Briggs. We're here for, you know, the trial on motive and mental state, etc. So if we were in Texas, Barbara would have a much better argument.
Ms. Keshen, what is your perspective? Because so much of this boils down to the one capital murder case we do have in New Hampshire. Was the case against Michael Addison a miscarriage of justice?
Well, to answer that question directly, the jury found that Michael Addison did not intentionally kill Officer Briggs. That's what the jury found. So the only intentional killing in that case will be done by the state if it does happen. But on a kind of a broader question around that, you know, I agree that New Hampshire is a small state. We do have a narrow law. I appreciate that. I appreciate the people who work within the system of New Hampshire. But we live in a country, and our country has a flawed system. It's a system that is undeniably racist. It's a system that has been flawed, that has put innocent men and women in prison on death row and coming close to death. And it's likely a system that has put innocent people to death. And I've come to think that as long as New Hampshire has the death penalty, we are complicit in perpetuating that system for our country, and that's wrong. And New Hampshire can take a stand against all the evils that occur in other states that may not occur here by repealing the death penalty.
Do you believe that Michael Addison faced a racist jury, I guess, here, that there was a race issue?
I'm not going to go as far as to say that, but I have to believe the studies that say that, you know, we all have implicit bias, we all have implicit racial bias, and that racial bias plays a part in the fact that proportionately so many more brown-skinned people are on death row in this country than are in the general population.
Mr. Douglas, yes. What's your perspective on this? There have been other police officers murdered in New Hampshire. Those convicts did not face the death penalty. Was this a racial issue with Mr. Addison?
I don't think it was, and it's interesting because when I was on the Superior Court as a trial judge, I remember especially in Rockingham County talking to jurors where there were black defendants, and they kind of went the other way. They said, we're all so white here, we have to really be careful that we're not motivated by race. And we're in a unique state that way, where the racial minorities are very small. So I don't see that. I didn't see it when I was a judge. In fact, a jump ball would go to the black defendant, frankly. They'd come in with a lesser charge than the prosecutor wanted. So I don't see any evidence. I know the jury was carefully questioned by both sides at length, and there's no reason to believe that it was a racially motivated conviction.
What happens to Michael Addison's sentence if this repeal goes through?
Well, the way the bill is written this year says that it's effective only for people convicted of capital murder after the law takes effect. There are still arguments. There was a Connecticut case, State versus Santiago, about 5 years ago, where the Connecticut Supreme Court said, once you repeal the death penalty, we can't have anyone put to death thereafter, even though it's silent on that. And the concern is that that will mean Addison gets the benefit of the new law. I think the sponsors claim that's not the case, but when it gets to the courts, it could be a different matter.
Ms. Keshen, do you think there's litigation ready to go, essentially, to say that Addison should not be executed should this law go through?
Oh, I expect that there is.
And one of the arguments that is parallel to this is, that, and you've talked about this too, the sort of, I guess on the repeal side, they view it as sort of this absurd hierarchy of victims or of suffering, because a victim of murder or of their family shouldn't be placed in a hierarchy here. But this is unique in New Hampshire because you do have one person on death row and one widow of a police officer who was slain. Why shouldn't they be on an elevated level, I guess? Why shouldn't her suffering exist on a higher plane than, say, other families of murder victims?
Well, I mean, Adam, over the last 15 years or so, I have had the unique privilege, if you call it a privilege, of speaking to countless family members who have lost loved ones to murder. And everyone suffers. Everyone suffers, and and it's painful for them to say that somehow your family suffering is not sufficient for this elevated punishment. Your loved one is not worthy of this elevated punishment. We don't need elevated punishments in this country, and we don't need to put people into categories and separate sort of the wheat from the chaff in the death penalty debate. That's insulting, and it's painful to victims to hear that kind of language.
Yeah, I don't agree. I think it's very clear when Warren Rudman and I wrote this law in 1974, the aim was to help protect the police officers and to deter assaults in prison. That was the main focus, and then others have been added on to it. Judges, people who are in the government trying to carry out the laws of society bear special risks. Our prison guards are not armed. They don't have mace. They don't have a billy club. They go in to a tier with 60 convicted felons with nothing more than what I have on today, clothes in their hands. They need to know that if a lifer or a double lifer decides he's going to kill one of them, that some big penalty will be there. Otherwise, they will not feel as protected as they should. That's my view, and I still think the victims that are the folks covered by our death penalty law is narrow enough that it shouldn't be repealed.
And Barbara, does repeal put those people at risk?
You know, it's really interesting. I was thinking, I was reflecting after the vote last night about the people that we've heard testify over the years and the people that we have not heard from over the years. And in the 15 years that I've been working to repeal the death penalty, I cannot think of one single correction officer who ever came in and testified that he thought the death penalty would, for lifers would keep him safe. It simply has not been an issue for correction officers. In fact, the former deputy warden of the New Hampshire state prisons, as soon as he retired, came and joined our coalition and our coalition board, Bill McGonigal, and he was a valued member of our board for many years. And his position was that that the death penalty is not necessary for correction officers, that the prisons are a generally safe place, that lifers know that the prison is their home, their quote-unquote home until they die, and so that they are generally more well-behaved even than the general population. And for those that cause a risk and pose any kind of a risk, there's a way to segregate them and keep them isolated that doesn't involve the threat of the death penalty hanging over them.
And last word, Mr. Douglas, will there be a lobbying effort to try to convince some of these senators to change a vote with the governor?
Well, I think so. It's different when you vote on a bill than when the governor vetoes it. And I hope that some of those who did vote to repeal will now reconsider and give some thought to the fact that the governor is elected statewide, and he feels very strongly about this, and I hope that they will save the death penalty for the narrow categories we have.
Chuck Douglas, Barbara Keshen, thank you so much for helping us address this very serious issue.
Thanks, Adam.